as far as do I think self-management can work, that's why I was coming to Yugoslavia, because I rejected the Soviet model. I thought that you cannot talk about socialism without worker management, and I was very interested in going to see the process. And I'd see meetings in which workers were, in the workers' councils, were actively discussing questions, but they tended to be questions like relative income for people in different shops within the enterprise, not questions of whether we should introduce a new product. They were leaving a whole series of questions to the experts. And from that experience, watching how the division between thinking and doing remained in Yugoslavia, in the whole management model, has led me to certain conclusions, which I've written papers on, which is the whole question of the transformation of the workday. What you did not have in Yugoslav self-management was a process by which workers were educated in the production process to make decisions. So one of the things we've argued in Venezuela is that the workday, the traditional workday, be reduced from 8 hours to 6 hours, but the 2 hours that our people are released for would be for education in accounting techniques and the techniques of management of their enterprises to create the capabilities for workers to manage without reliance upon experts. That wasn't done here, and I remember reading about how, of course, workers were too tired after a long, hard day of 8 hours of work to begin to worry about management. You have to transform the workday. You don't reduce it, you redefine work to include education. So that's one of the things we argue for in Venezuela, which is to reduce it from 8 hours to 6 hours and to use the 2 hours for education or for releasing people to work in the community, because that's part of building socialism too, community work. So I hope I've answered your question, but I hope we can talk later about the role of the party, because that interested me. I know what the role of the party and the way it sees production, possession of production in the Soviet model and in the Cuban model, but I don't know the role it played here.
Hvala za pitanje i hvala za odgovor. Evo, prvo tamo, pa ćemo onda tamo.
So I'll ask in English, and I apologize if you already answered this question during what you said before. Maybe I didn't understood, but so speaking about the difference between socialism and communism, if I'm right, you postulated that socialism would be a phase in which the new society is not reproducing on its own, reproducing its own preconditions of existence, while on the other side, communism is reproducing its own conditions. And so, what would be the way to pass from the present society to communism? Because this intermediate stage of socialism, historically, it has been tried to be solved by the ways of dictatorship of proletariat, of avant-garde party who leads the transformation of the society, but it was in all circumstances achieved by the party who has a monopoly of power. So we have this model in Soviet Union when the Stalin was exterminating kulaks. The official reason was because they are ideologically, they are not progressive, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at the situation in the crude power terms, it was because they had the ownership of the land and they constituted an independent power base, which was concurrent to the power of the party. And so I'm interested, if we have the present situation in which many parts of society believe in this system, I mean in capitalism, in one sort of the other, maybe it is just because they really believe, maybe just because they are too apathetic to be self-conscious and to believe that change is possible. How would the socialism, in your opinion, be introduced if we do not have a party which has a monopoly? And can you maybe relate this with the present, what's going at present in Venezuela? That's not too hard a question. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, let me make clear that I reject entirely the distinction between two stages of socialism and communism. that I'm talking about one organic system which is in the process of becoming. So it initially begins by, its inheritances from the previous system will differ in every particular case. Direct. Okay. Its inheritance in every particular case will be different. There is no single, manual that we go to. So when you take that position of that there's one organic system which proceeds from becoming to being, the question is, what do you call it? Now some people want to call it communism, and I, reject that argument, and I give a reason for it in my book, why it should be called socialism rather than communism, because communism is no longer understood we can't forget what that means to the mass of people. Communism is not seen as a economic system in which people produce for each other. Communism is seen as a political system which oppresses working people. That's the identification. Lenin in State and Revolution pointed out that, Engels never referred to himself as a social democrat because Proudhonists and Kautsky and others called themselves, and LaSalle called themselves social democrats, but he never referred to him as a social democrat. It's a political decision. So it's a political decision to say we're talking about socialism as the organic system, not communism at this point. So a single organic system. Now the question is, what are the elements in building that? Well, again, it's going to differ in every particular case as to where you advance. But when you talk about the dictatorship of the proletariat, I talk about this in my book Beyond Capital. I use the term the worker state. And what is characteristic of that worker state is the profound democracy that Marx described in the Paris Commune, and which Engels subsequently referred to as, gentlemen, you all worry about the dictatorship of the proletariat. Look at the Paris Commune. That was the dictatorship of the proletariat. That was a profound democracy. You will not see one mention of parties, in the discussion of the Paris Commune. The characteristic, and I think this is the characteristic of a common characteristic of socialism for the 21st century as it emerges in Latin America, and there are great differences between Venezuela, Bolivia, and Ecuador, is the strong emphasis on democracy. The omnipresence of democracy at the lowest possible level of decentralization as being the way in which people can in fact control the decisions which affect their lives. Now, do you need leadership in this process? Clearly you do need leadership in the process, because you can't assume that everyone is at the same level immediately. I've been arguing this for many years, the whole question of the focus on creating human conditions for human development. And I remember in the early 1990s, I had written an article called The Socialist Fetter, Socialist Fetter, in Socialist Register, and I was talking to a good Cuban friend, and he listened to my argument about, the importance of creating conditions in which people develop their capacity, etc. And he said, Michael, but what's the role for the party then? And I said, the role of the party is to create the conditions in which people can develop their capacities. It's to provide that kind of leadership, not leadership instead of allowing workers to develop their capacities. And that's been the problem. When you forget that the issue is what I call the key link of human development, and that is only possible through protagonism, through practice, then the guidelines for a party is to create the conditions in which people can develop, in which you have worker management, real worker management, not just councils that rubber stamp, and where you have real community decision making. Did I answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Well, if I didn't, yeah. Okay.